The music stopped when she entered the room, though no one had told the musicians to stop, and the Duke of Redmayne, who had spent a year telling himself he had forgotten her face, discovered in the space of a single heartbeat that he had forgotten nothing at all. Cecily Marsh stood in the doorway of the Ashworth ballroom in deep blue silk, a year older and 100-fold more composed, and the whole glittering assembly turned to look at her, and then, slowly, unmistakably, turned to look at him. Because they remembered. Of course they remembered. It had been the scandal of the season a year ago almost to the night. How Tobias, Duke of Redmayne, had courted the beautiful and untitled Cecily Marsh through a whole spring, danced with no one else, walked with her in every garden in the county, let the world believe an engagement was days away. And then, when his formidable mother made it plain that a duke did not marry the daughter of a wool merchant, however lovely, however clever, he had gone cold. He had not written her a letter. He had not paid her the courtesy of a word. He had simply stopped calling, and let his silence say what he had lacked the courage to say himself, and let her walk out of his life with her head high and her heart, he knew, in pieces. He had told himself it was necessary. He had told himself a great many things in the year since, and not one of them had let him sleep. Now she was here, and she was looking at him. Their eyes met across the crowded floor, and for one terrible, magnificent instant the whole room fell away, and there was only Cecily Marsh whom he had wronged, and her gaze was not angry. That was the thing that broke him. It was not angry. It was calm and distant and entirely without hope of him, the look one gives a stranger one used to know, and she held it exactly long enough to make certain he understood, and then she turned to greet her hostess and dismissed him from her notice as easily as brushing lint from a sleeve. The Duke of Redmayne set down his glass and did not remember doing it. She has come up in the world, murmured Lord Ashworth at his elbow, following his gaze with frank interest. Old Marsh died in the winter, you know. Left her everything, the mills, the warehouses, the lot. She's one of the richest women in the county now, tight or no. Half the men in this room have been circling her for a month. He chuckled. Rather a change from a year ago, Redmayne, when your mother wouldn't have her at any price. Yes, said the Duke, rather a change. He did not hear the rest of what Ashworth said. He was watching Cecily move through the room, gracious and self-possessed, gathering admirers as she went, and he was understanding with a slow, sickening clarity precisely what he had thrown away. Not her fortune. He had never cared for that, and he cared for it less now. Her. The particular sound of her laugh, low and unhurried. The way she had listened to him, really listened, as though what he said mattered, when everyone else in his life had only ever listened for the advantage in it. The way she had once told him, walking in the rose garden at Redmayne, that she thought his mother's disapproval frightened him more than he would admit, and how he had laughed and denied it, and how she had been entirely exactly right. His mother was dead now too. She had died in the spring. The great cold arbiter of who might and might not be loved, and the Duke of Redmayne had stood at her grave and felt, beneath the proper grief, a shameful and enormous freedom, and then had ridden home to an empty house and understood that his freedom had come a year too late. Because he had already used his cowardice to burn the one bridge worth crossing, he should not have approached her. Any man of sense would have let her be. But the Duke of Redmayne had spent a year being a man of sense, and it had made him wretched, and so when the country dance ended and Cecily stood for a moment alone by the tall windows, he crossed the floor to her before he could reconsider, and the whole room watched him do it. "Miss Marsh," he said, and bowed. "I hoped I might have the honour of a dance." She looked at him. She did not curtsy lower than courtesy required. "Your Grace is very kind," she said, "but my card is full." It was not full. They both knew it was not full. She had refused 3 men that evening already, having come to enjoy herself and not to be hunted, and she was refusing him now not for the same reason but for a far older one, and she was doing it gently, and the gentleness was the cruelest part. "Then perhaps," he said, low, a moment on the terrace, "I have something I ought to have said a year ago, and I find I cannot carry it another day." "There is nothing you need say to me, Your Grace," she answered, and her composure did not crack by so much as a hair. "You said everything a year ago quite clearly. I understood you perfectly. There is no debt between us and no need for a scene, and I should be sorry to spoil Lady Ashworth's evening." She inclined her head. "I wish you very well, truly I do. Now if you will excuse me." And she walked away from him into the crowd, and left him standing alone at the windows with the whole room's eyes upon him, and the whole room's verdict already delivered, and it was no more than he deserved. He did not sleep that night either. But somewhere in the long grey hours the Duke of Redmayne stopped pitying himself, which was a thing he'd done a great deal of in the past year, and began instead to think clearly, and without excuse, about what winning back a woman actually required. Not a grand gesture. She would see through a grand gesture in an instant. She saw through everything. Not his title, which had once been the very thing that condemned her. Not even an apology, though he owed her 1,000. What it required, he understood at last. Sustained, unglamorous, unrewarded proof that the man who had been a coward at the first cold word from his mother had become a man who would not be a coward again. And there was no way to offer such proof except to earn it, day after day, expecting nothing. So he did not send flowers. He did not write extravagant letters. He went instead to the county. Cicely Marsh, he learned, was engaged that season in a quiet war. Her late father's mills employed half the village, and a consortium of gentlemen, men of exactly his own rank, men who had cut her at parties a year ago and courted her fortune now, were attempting to force her to sell the mills cheaply by squeezing her credit and whispering against her in the places where credit is decided. A woman in trade, they murmured, untitled, unmarried, unfit to hold such a concern. It was the same weapon that had been used against her a year before, the weapon of who is and is not worthy, and the Duke of Redmayne, who had once wielded it against her by his silence, found that he could not stand to watch it wielded again. He did not tell her. That was the point. He went quietly to the men whose credit and whose word could break her, men who owed the Duke of Redmayne favours or feared his displeasure or simply wished to be seen at his table, and one by one, over a matter of weeks, he closed the doors the consortium had hoped to open. He extended his own credit, anonymously through his banker, to steady her mills through the squeeze. He let it be known, in the careless way that dukes let things be known, that the gentleman who troubled the concerns of the Marsh mills would find the Duke of Redmayne a personal enemy. He asked for nothing, he signed nothing in his own name, and when the consortium, baffled and thwarted, gave up the field and slunk away, Cicely Marsh kept her mills and never knew, for a while, that a duke had stood between her and ruin. She found out in the end, as such things are always found out. Her banker was an honest man and a poor keeper of secrets, and one autumn afternoon he let slip, in the course of praising the strength of her position, the name of the great patron who had steadied it. And Cicely Marsh, who had refused 3 suitors and a duke and had built for herself a life that needed no man in it, sat very still in her father's old office among the ledgers and understood. She came to Redmayne herself. She did not send a card. She arrived on a grey afternoon, much as he had once so cravenly failed to arrive at her door, and she was shown into his library, and she stood before his desk in her plain travelling cloak and looked at him with those calm, clear eyes that saw through everything. "You had no right," she said. No, he agreed. He had risen when she entered and he stood now, and he did not come around the desk. "I had no right to any part of you. I lost every right a year ago, in the worst way a man can lose it, not by refusing you, but by not troubling to refuse you to your face. I know it. I have not forgotten it for a single day. I did not help you to earn anything, Cicely. I did it because I could not sleep, for the thought of the same weapon being used against you twice, and my being able to blunt it and not doing so. You wished me to be grateful," she said. "I wished you to keep your mills," he said. "I expected you never to know. I would have been content to have you never know." He drew a breath. "The one thing I will confess to hoping, and I am done, now, with hiding what I hope, is that you might one day believe I am not the coward you last saw. Not so that you will forgive me, so that you will not have to carry, for the rest of your life, the memory of having given your heart to a man who was made entirely of straw. You deserve better than that memory. I wanted to leave you a truer one." The silence in the library stretched long. The autumn light moved on the spines of the books, and Cicely Marsh, who had come there armoured in a year of hard-won peace, felt the armour shift and did not, this time, hurry to hold it in place. "When my father died," she said at last quietly, "and I was alone, and the whole county was circling me like crows, do you know, Tobias? I told myself I was glad you had shown your true colours a year before. Better then than later, I said. Better to know. I said it so often I nearly believed it. Her voice was steady, but her eyes were not. It was a lie. I never once stopped wishing you had simply been braver. That is the whole of what I wanted from you. Not a title. Not your mother's blessing. Only that you might have been brave enough to fight for me. And now you tell me you have spent a season fighting for me in the dark, expecting nothing, asking nothing. She stopped and pressed her lips together and mastered herself and did not quite succeed. You have made it very difficult to go on being sensible. He came around the desk then. He came slowly as a man approaches something he is terrified to frighten off, and he stopped an arm's length from her, and he did not touch her. Then be unsensible, he said very low, just this once. I am not asking you to trust the man I was. I am asking you to let me spend the right life proving I am no longer him. Marry me, Cecily. Not for your mills. You have kept them without me and you always will. Not to answer the county. Marry me because a year of silence taught me exactly what I threw away, and I have found I would rather have your quarrel than any other woman's love. And I mean, if you let me, to be brave for the rest of my life to make up for the one time I was not. She looked at him for a long moment, this woman he had wronged and wanted and very nearly lost forever. And then Cecily Marsh, who saw through everything, saw at last all the way through to the truth of him, and something that had been closed in her for a year opened again, carefully, like a door tried after a long absence and found, against all hope, unlocked. You will have to court me properly this time, she said, and her voice trembled on the edge of a smile. In front of everyone, in the daylight, no silences. In the daylight, he vowed. Before the king, if you like. No silences ever again so long as I live. And he kept the vow. He courted her through that whole bright autumn where the entire county could see, and he married her in the spring in the great church at Redmayne with the very consortium that had schemed against her seated in the pews to watch. And Cecily Marsh became a duchess with ever once ceasing to be the woman who ran her father's mills and saw through everything. But the thing the Duke of Redmayne treasured most was none of the public triumph. It was the ordinary evenings long after, when she would look up from her ledgers by the fire and catch him watching her, and smile, the low, unhurried smile he had feared for a whole year he would never see turned on him again, and he would understand, freshly and completely, that he had been given back the one thing a coward never expects to be given, a second chance, and the courage, at last, to be worthy of it.